Got it. All right, you guys see recording on there?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfecto. All right, my name is Alicia McCullough, and I write science fiction and fantasy. Actually, I write kick-ass Black women, warriors, and sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. I am here because I am excited about writing serials. I want to learn about serials. I think I've secretly been a serials author, but didn't know it. So I find that I'm having a home here in this new serials world. But I want to let some of you guys just, if a few people want to introduce themselves, say what they write and why they are writing serials or interested in it. I'll let you guys choose while I let people in.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Anne. I write science fiction, fantasy, and romance, sometimes together, sometimes not. I am a short story writer. I've never been able to write more than like 10, 15,000 words. I'm much happier down at 6.
And you and me are going to be really good friends.
Me too.
Okay, so there's a couple of us.
I found my people.
Yes.
So yeah, this is making me happy, episodic, where I can actually, claim to finish something and put it out there.
Yes.
Well, I'll jump in because Anne's my spirit animal. Because I'm same with my story. And I'm a lean writer too. My co-writer told me last week, people can say more than one sentence of dialogue at a time. But so I'm really excited because I think after Alana described what a good serial was, I was like, oh yeah, that's my jam. I'm right there. And fun fact, Alicia and I went to the same high school.
Oh, cool.
We did, right?
Exciting.
Somebody else want to go next?
Well, I'm Fernetta. I write fantasy, a little bit of romance, horror, supernatural. I'm thinking of doing a supernatural story for my serial. I took Alana's course because I was just curious because I heard about Kindle Vella and I was like, well, let's learn about serials. And then as I was watching this course, I was like, oh my God, every story idea I've ever had is a serial, because I read books, but I realized I pretty much grew up on reading manga and watching anime.
Yes.
And I read webtoons now. So, and all of those are just I think it was the plotting module. I was watching the plotting module and I was thinking of like all the manga arcs and like, oh no, I've always thought in my structure, this explains a lot about some of my novels I've written and why people are like, this structure is kind of weird. It explains a whole lot.
Right.
Well, that just means that you've got it by osmosis.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that somebody else had that same experience. I'm too old to have grown up with manga or anime, but we used to watch Kung Fu movies with subtitles. So like my story structure must have started there some kind of way. Hey, Layla, or you want to go next and tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Layla. I write romance mostly. I have several different pen names for different types of romance, and that's mainly what I've been doing. But I'm looking at this as kind of an opportunity to branch out into a different genre, maybe some kind of adventure or urban fantasy serial is something I'm thinking would be really fun for me, because I wasn't a romance writer originally. I got into it as a way of making money and then found out that I really liked it. But I have a bunch of projects from back in the day that were fantasy and sci-fi and urban fantasy kinds of things that I want to see if I can maybe like resurrect one of those and work on it as a fun side project.
How cool. I'm in good company with you. And there's my favorite Chris over there. What's happening? Chris, can you talk, or I know she's driving and traveling, so she might not hear.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in the same boat as Layla with romance, except that I turned out to not like it. And so I'm using this energy that I have for this as an opportunity to get back into sci-fi and fantasy.
Oh, so like we are kindred spirits here.
I think so. I think so. Maybe, is it Felicia, or I can't see just the name? Okay.
Yes, it's Felicia.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about what you write and why you're into serials right now, or not into serials?
Okay. Well, so I haven't written anything, guys. I am a complete newbie. I started researching a few months ago, thinking, yeah, maybe I'll get into this. And then, of course, Villa came out. And I'm like, okay, well, if there was ever a time for a newbie to jump in, then this may be
Good
it.
time.
Yeah.
So I am completely overwhelmed with self-publishing and everything right now. So I do enjoy the support system and the group that we have.
Cool beans. It's so good to, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're taking that step. This is a good place. Okay. All right, guys. So for those of you out there, because I'm recording this for the video, so we're working on this book, How to Write Light Novels and Web Novels. And I'm just going to say this. I'm so excited that Chris shared this book with me. I feel like it expanded on Elena's course. And I think it was like one of those books that kind of helped me put things into perspective. And I'm kind of hoping, to just gain a deeper understanding of the book from this book discussion. And I'm glad to be here to talk to other writers about it. Do you guys, everybody doesn't have to share, but do you guys have some hopes about this? I just feel good by the fact that everybody in this group, you guys feel like kindred spirits. So that's a step in the right direction. But does anyone have any hopes about, the book and talking about it?
Well, I was really impressed with the Rising Hero story structure, because I'm big on story structure. And I thought that this was like the hero's journey, only better.
Yeah, I think for this book in particular, so from having basically taught myself to write romance novels from scratch over the last few years, I've read a lot of books on story structure and storytelling and that kind of thing. And I think the light novel book approached it. It was really good to get a look at a well-established genre from a completely different storytelling tradition, because there was a lot in there that I really hadn't thought about and that I hadn't seen in the books that I was reading that maybe gave me a lot of food for thought on, building different kinds of stories than the ones that are typically popular in the media here.
I would agree with that.
Sorry, continue.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It was interesting for me to read it from this perspective because I've read light novels. And so coming at from that angle and then coming at from this other angle, it made me realize like, oh, this is why sometimes I don't want to read books from like the US. I want to read light novels because the structure is just a little different. The arcs and the like the hero's progression are also just different, and they just so much faster. They are a little shorter the way they're packaged, but they read so much faster.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you bring up that's a great idea, because when you think about that, I feel like this book was broken down into those three parts. The first part was kind of like, this is like the market, and this is kind of what the industry is like, and it kind of gave us a great idea. For me, I found it enlightening just to understand the market, simply because all I know is old kung fu movies and Korean dramas. Both of my sisters, they read on apps, so they like use the Dream app, or some of them, one of them reads web fiction. But for the most part, besides just some of the US things that you kind of come in contact with, I didn't know much about this billion-dollar Asian market, right? So it's kind of cool to me just to learn. But it was jaw-dropping for me, some of the information. But I just liked having that great overview. So I think he did a good industry overview on that first part. But I don't know, maybe do you guys kind of feel the same way, or did somebody notice something different from me?
No, I feel the same way, and I think this R.A. Paterson, he did a fantastic job just writing the book. It wasn't boring. It was very interesting. So I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really helpful to me because I've never watched manga or read any of the light novels or that kind of thing. I think of serials more as like a television series type thing. And that's how I structured the first serial that I wrote as episodes of a television show, which, I want to get there one day to television. And I think this is a great way to get there. And I gotta believe that Amazon, with Amazon Studios, is probably looking at which one of these things in Vela, which serials will be successful, and maybe taking a look at that for television. So I think that's fantastic. And I think it probably fits a lot better with the way people are reading on apps and phones rather than reading paper books like we used to back in the olden days. So it's a new genre, it's a new way of reading, and I think we're on the beginning of something big here.
Yeah, I was really excited though from what he presented, that there was like so many options that I had, so I think a lot of writers' discussions right now, everybody's like, oh, Kendall Vela, and they're rather narrow in their scope. And what I like about what he did with this in the first part of the market was he kind of made it broader and helped you to see that it's a big industry out there that's hungry. And maybe even that kind of industry can shift over to Western world, but I might be pushing it with that, but I was excited about that part.
No, I
No, I
agree
think
with you.
that's correct. Yeah. Go for it.
Because one thing that I knew that web novels and that this kind of online serialized storytelling was really big in Asia, because I have some friends who have been getting into it lately. I was a manga fan way back in the day, but I haven't really been, on top of any of that. But I know that those translated versions or like fan translations of a lot of web novels are starting to become really big here. Mm-hmm. But what I hadn't realized is that there is actually, until the Vela thing came along, I didn't know about Radish, and I didn't know, I knew Wattpad existed, but I didn't know that I didn't know it was anything other than fan fiction. So kind of becoming aware that this is really an active up and coming market here that is already booming in Asia is really fascinating to me. I think this is a really good time to get in on the ground floor of it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say the light novel market, the translated light novel market, only really started taking off within the last 5 years. Like some of the examples he mentions in the book, they really only started coming over within the last 5 years. And I would say it only really started like exploding within the last 3. I know one of the examples he mentioned, Solo Leveling, that was just released this year, and it is like a massive bestseller. Like, you would not believe how many people love that series.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a massive, massive bestseller.
So did you find any of what he said to be old hat for you, or was
well, some of them were, this was written a few years ago, so like there were a couple new categories that weren't mentioned. Like, I would say within the last year, there's like this new subgenre. I guess it still falls on their isekai, but because a lot of the examples he uses, the main characters are male. A lot of the newer ones, the main characters are women, and I call them the villainous novels because it's the structure is basically like the main character, for whatever reason, she finds herself like in her favorite romance novel or like her favorite dating sim, but instead of being the heroine, she's actually like the rival, like the one who like tries to steal the love interest away or just is mean to the heroine. But typically, I guess in the original story, she's that character meets a bad end. So now she's that character. So she doesn't want to meet the bad end. So she like tries to do everything to avoid it. So she ends up changing the plot so that depending on how, whatever category you're in, like all the love interests will fall in love with her. She becomes best friends with the heroine falls in love with her. It just depends, whatever. It's really like, that's relatively new. It's the one that interests me.
I like that already. I was like, I want to write that story.
It's relatively new, so it can go so many different ways.
Right.
That's quite a twist.
Yeah.
She's like, oh my God, I don't want to die. Because like usually like, since she's like the villainess, she die, she ends up penniless, she might get like sold off, depending on whatever, like if it's fantasy or just like contemporary. She's like, oh no, I don't want this to happen. So she does.
So it's sort of like a twisty version of the anti-heroine, right?
That actually kind of makes me think of, so one of the things I've been thinking about with this, I used to watch a lot of soap operas back in the late 80s and the 90s. And it's kind of making me think of how many of those, they tended to have these, anti-heroines, basically. They're like the Susan Lucci type of characters. The
Erica
rival.
Kane.
Susan Lucci. I was a Susan Lucci fan. Yes.
Yeah, that kind of character was really big in those, where she's not the good girl, but she's also not the like not a complete antagonist either. You get into her life.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so it seemed to me that part 2 of the book kind of took that deep dive that we were talking about into the different structures. And everybody was talking about that rising hero structure. And I have to tell you, I thought it was fantastic. I was like, yes, seriously, very cool. I'm ready to use it already. But some of the other ones, I wasn't sure if they would translate in the same way over into a Western market. So I'm kind of wondering, do you guys have others besides the Rising Hero one that you really liked and was like, yes, I want to use that one? Or are you going to use caution with them? Or maybe even do you guys feel like this might be a unique opportunity to come up with something that's interesting, different for the US or the Western market?
I know that I'm really drawn to the Rising Hero because it was like a simplified version of the hero's journey. I don't enjoy the hero's journey, and I can apply the heroine's journey to the Rising Hero. The Gale character heroine's journey, because I love that. But a friend of mine, I was talking to them, and they've been reading, and they're American, born and raised. They've been reading a lot of the correct pronunciation because I don't have the word in front of me, but the Ikasides. What is it? Yeah. Isekai, thank you. Yeah. They've been reading a lot of the Isekai fiction in general, so they were super excited to dive into telling a story in that, which is interests me because that was one of the ones where I didn't engage with as much because it is a lot of structure, and they are a structured storyteller with working within a system and using the rules of the system to tell the story. And so I think that that's going to appeal really heavily to world builders and world building enjoyment readers.
Yeah. It's also, that section was interesting to me because it really broke down how it differs by culture, because I'm most familiar with the Isekai, which is the Japanese version. The Chinese and Korean versions, I guess there they call it transmigration, is a little different. And I was like, oh, because I was wondering why some of the Korean and Chinese web novels that do that, I guess it's portal fantasy essentially, was more interesting to me, was because it felt newer to me since we have less of that available in English.
Yeah, I was fascinated too with the, how he was talking about the 3 different types, because they we may lump them all together, but that's interesting. Yes. So you mostly just read the Japanese versions?
Because the Japanese version is the one that has been the most readily available until within the last like year. That's the thing.
Got it.
I feel like it was only within the last like 2 or 3 years that we saw more Korean web novels and Chinese web novels online.
I feel like Korea is taking over everything lately, though.
I mean, it's part of like their soft power initiative, but
yes,
they're very good. Like Solo Leveling, I read the first volume of that. It's not. I discovered I don't really like gaming raid fantasy, which is what that is, but I can understand why it's really popular. It's not my thing. I don't think I like the gaming. I don't like the gaming mechanics. It just doesn't interest me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of knew. Well, lit RPG has been kind of taken over in as a category in English language publishing, like self-publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of knew that it came out of that background, but it really took off just 2 or 3 years ago. Not translated ones, but original ones written here, and for a mostly male audience, I think.
I can see that, because I would say the gaming raid fantasies from Asia are mostly geared towards a male audience. And I feel like, especially if they read, because a lot of the Korean web novels have like a webtoon version, and that the webtoons get fan translated more readily than the web novels, because obviously that takes, not that it's not easier, but like it takes less effort of like just translating like dialogue bubbles versus actual text. So I can see if they just read a bunch of like gaming raid fantasy webtoons and were like, this is cool, and translated it to that. Because I didn't know what lit RPG was until like I think within the last year, and I said, isn't this just like gaming fantasy? But so I realized belatedly that they were actually related.
Yeah, lit RPG for me, I haven't picked up on it, and every time I do read one, I'm like, what is this? It is like a sick man's fantasy or something. I was like,
what guy kind of genre, I think.
Yeah, they're just really into their stats and way, because this is the thing in Solo Leveling, every day he has like a quest he has to do, and it's just like they list all his stats, and I was like, oh no, I'm definitely not a gamer, because I don't actually know what these stats mean.
Right. Okay. But I was fascinated in the book that because it gave lit RPG some history for me, because I was like, where the heck did this come from, and why am I don't want to read this. I don't care how much money it's making.
I had only heard of it because I know a guy that's making 5 figures writing this stuff.
Yes, and they're making money.
He's making 5 figures a month. Yeah, writing this.
Hugely popular.
Hugely popular.
Does anybody else have any more thoughts about the structure, or like do any of the other ones kind of appeal to you guys?
One thing that I found very interesting is I've been following a Canadian author for a couple of years now. She writes mainly novellas, and her structure has been try succeed cycles, which is like totally against all the advice you hear.
Yeah.
But she has rabid fans, and I mean, she is making a lot of money, and for years she's been writing the same structure. And reading this book, she just is using the rising hero. And the question of whether that would translate to the Western market, she's proof that it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I feel like to me, the way he described it, the try win or try succeed sounds like exactly right. I mean, that you really want a hero that's, well, I guess the supporting characters, they can die and get hurt and they can fail, but you're having this fantasy through reading. Yeah. And so you want to connect with the winner. Which is, you're right. That goes against kind of everything that we've been taught about writing, because you want to see the character get tortured and they have to fail, so you could feel like they've made it or something like that, right? And
Has to be conflict, right? An obstacle.
Yes. And it sounds like that's not the direction that you should go in and with these kind of stories, which that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of leeway for doing a lot of different kinds of things, but there is a lot in that book. Well, this is why it's really interesting to me, just looking at it as a different from the advice that you normally get in Western books on how to tell stories, because there is a lot that's different. And one that I was looking at with a lot of interest was task stories, which is there isn't really a whole lot. I mean, the closest thing to it in Western storytelling is something more like Top Chef or something like that. And from thinking back on my manga reading days, I think there's a lot of that in manga too, where it's just about the details of, you know, being a florist or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm really that's one that I am really curious if that could do well here as just kind of an escapist kind of thing, the same way that people will watch cooking shows or reality TV, but with a fiction element to it.
Good point.
I started writing short, like things to go into the 1 hour romance category, and so I read a lot of them just to look at structure, because I'm a structure junkie. I'm looking at structure. And you know how they always say in romance, you have to have the dark night of the soul and they have to have the big conflict and the big breakup. And I started reading a series and there was none of that. They meet each other, they decide they like each other, they get together, happily ever after, the end. No conflict, no big fight, no big blowout. And it was something I wasn't used to. So I'm wondering, is it the same kind of mentality, you know, that you want to see your hero succeed rather than go through a bunch of drama.
Right. Okay, it looks like Chris is having some connectivity issues, but she said one of the questions she'd like to hear people's thoughts on, the author pushes that characters for these kinds of stories should be paraphrasing, shallow, and mostly archetypal. Honestly, that's not a bad thing. Lots of folks enjoy reading those, and I've certainly written a lot of them. But one of the things I'm super interested in with the long form serial is having time to dive deeply into characters over a long period of time. I think there's a place for both in the market, but I'm wondering what everyone else thinks.
I know for me, as someone who's read them, like the shallow characterization is actually like my biggest frustration with light novels. So I feel like for me personally, I would like to do a sweet spot where we have like the deeper characterization we expect from like Western storytelling, but combine it with like the try succeed cycle, like novels, web novels. Just because if you read a lot of like, especially if you, for example, just read like the Japanese isekai novels, over time, you stop being able to differentiate between the characters. You only remember it by the plot, which there's nothing wrong with that. But as someone who like reads for character and writes for character, like would like to have a little more, it doesn't have to be like super deep dive into characterization, but be a little more distinct. Because some of them really are just like ciphers.
Yeah, it's something that was something that I thought about reading. Well, that kind of bounced off a little bit in the book too, because I'm also a character reader, and this is something that in romance you do often get these really archetypical, inserty kinds of characters too. And there's one of the things that I also think it would be really fun to do with a serial is kind of be able to get into developing characters over time and doing something more complex.
Well, if you think about the fact that soaps on TV started out in radio, and I mean, my mom watched those for probably 30 years, and they hooked me for at least 10. You know, that's a long time to be working stories on the same
character.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm thinking of doing is a romance, but I want to have multiple couples that I'm kind of like A story, B story type things, like
Mhm.
they did in the old soaps.
So if I said a martini shaken, not stirred, does anybody not know what character that is?
We know who that is.
We know who that is, yeah.
Right? And is he not shallow, right? He's like the James Bond is the perfect spy. I feel
Shallow
like
and no character development, no
no.
arc. He's the same as he
could be
was in
switched out,
1963,
yes.
right?
They kind of made the last one, they made him the rugged, the dangerous James Bond, but he was still James Bond, sleeping with women and doing his thing. I guess there's room though for you to kind of have that characterization and kind of make that character that everybody can relate to. I will say in the back of the resources section, he put in Lisa Cron's book. I don't know if you guys have read Story Genius or
Okay.
Wired for Story,
Oh, that
but
one.
I mean, I think her concept is that you have that that spine or that arc, or you have that misbelief. And I think it's deeper than misbelief. I like Brian McDonald's method of talking about armature, because I think that's really what happens there. And so sometimes you can have these characters, but people are following because they want to know how this survival lesson turns out for this person. Or so then I guess there's ways for the reader to connect with the character in a similar way to what Paterson is talking about, but add more depth to that character by giving them a spine. At least that's my 2 cents. So we've kind of talked about the first 2 parts. So the first part we said was that was kind of industry. And then the second part was the structure. And so this third part, I think, is about writing and planning your serial. And so for me, some of that was a little old hat, but I did think that this section was thorough. And I did learn some new things. Did anybody learn anything new about not necessarily the writing process, but what it meant to write serials in that third part?
Actually,
not really, because I guess I'm one
yeah.
of the old timers in this class. So I've been through all the lessons, and a lot of that I think was already ingrained in me. But I thought it was a really good breakdown of what to do.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of just in an absorbing information sort of zone right now with reading that book and taking the class and just sort of because this is a different structure than I've worked with before. So I'm just sort of, taking things on board and trying to figure out how it's done.
Yeah, kind of pick out what that's what you, yeah, just pick out, I don't need that, I need this, right? So I actually did enjoy this book a lot. I liked his discussion on systems and cheats. So I thought that was kind of informative. The one thing I think I would have loved for him to do was to kind of go a little bit more in depth into like world building, or kind of how you build a world from the perspective of the serial. Because I think for him, it was more like systems and cheats and less about how you put the world together. But is there anything that you guys felt like, you know what, I wish he had just like gone more in depth on X? What would you have liked to have seen? What do you think he missed?
Definitely more on world building. I think that it was lacking there, but otherwise, I thought it was a great book.
Yeah, I think it really it covered a lot of territory for no thicker a book than it is. It's there's a lot, even a lot of the backstory and historical stuff on the development of things like light novels and so on was really interesting to me.
Yeah. I thought the parallels for what he said, what's popular in web fiction, what you know, what they all have in common, which is the system, the cheats, wish fulfillment, etc. That translates to novels as well. And I know that sometimes when I get into novels and I'm not feeling it, it's usually one of those things are actually missing. So I found that to be quite interesting.
Cool. So it looks like Chris says, I think this book combined with You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story is the learning powerhouse for serial writers. I would agree.
I'm not familiar with that book.
That one, so they just can't. Yep, that's it. And then he just came out with this workbook, which was fantastic too.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
love
well,
the
I have to look at
workbook.
that.
Dropping that in my notes.
Yeah. So it's to me, that's why I say I love this whole idea of like writing web fiction and you know, being able to franchise it and make it bigger. It could turn to gaming. It can turn. So I think I love the back of this book because he says something like the difference is clear. Star Wars was built with a specific type of creative architecture, which allowed it to scale over decades. So I think it started in 1977. 2 movies were released that shared a similar genre, budget, and target market. Close Encounters of the Third Kind ended up being a really good movie, but Star Wars was a really good movie that ultimately became a $60 billion franchise. And so that's what You Need a Bigger Story is about, that whole series, which was kind of cool. So back to the how to write light novels and web novels. I think for me, I did learn a lot from it. And we were talking about picking things. So the one technique that I thought was really cool was the key elements twister. I like that part where he talked about twisting the Harry Potter story up and coming up with something the same but different, which I thought was kind of cool. Do you all have one thing that you know you're gonna use 100%? It was like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, this isn't really 100%, but I think the systems, thinking about the character as working within a system is something I'm going to be thinking about going forward in writing generally, because it's something that I haven't really seen addressed in other writing books, and it does, I think, apply really generally just as something to be thinking about as your storytelling.
Yeah, that systems and cheat look like that could be used in whatever genre you choose to write, you know? I mean, it could be some of anything, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I like the way he framed that because I never thought of it. Like when I'd only heard it's the system, I only ever thought of it in the context of like gaming fantasy, where like you're actually the system, not with you're like a new servant in a palace and they have all these.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it is. And I'm like, that actually is an interesting way to think about it and actually helpful in terms of structuring the environment and the conflict they have to face.
Yeah, I think it's just a really useful way. Like it's not something that's going to be useful always, but for especially for some kinds of stories and for world building, or it could be an office and somebody moving up through an office, or some. There's a lot of different ways that you could use that. It could be society in general.
Small towns.
School.
Yes, a school. Schools are systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Teaching you how to survive in the bigger system, right?
Yes. Well, I think that for me, Elena's course was incredible. And I think this book is also incredible for like framing, how to do serials. I think one of the things that I love and why I really wanted to have a book discussion, because I think I'm more on the side of web fiction, being able to sell it direct from my website, being able to cultivate my own ecosystem. I am interested in Kindle Vella, and I'm interested in some of the other apps and places to put my writing. But I would almost like for those people to move from there over to my ecosystem and buy from me direct, because I like, maybe I'm a control freak. I'm not really sure.
Well, no, I mean, I think it makes sense because, you know, I just went through the Radish thing. I don't know if you guys heard about how they changed the payment system, like 2 weeks, you know, they gave you 2 week notice. And even now I looked at my report today and I know how many coins I've earned, but I have no idea what that's worth. So when when you're at the mercy of, an entity like Radish or Kindle Vella, whatever they do, you either roll with it or go somewhere else, right? Whereas if you have your own ecosystem, you control the pricing, you control the access. It's just that you don't have the foot traffic like you do with something big like that.
Yeah, that's what I think I'll be working towards, on trying to get the foot traffic. And but I'm excited about this. I like the idea. I think to me, this gave me it opened up my mind to think about all these possibilities that were available with serial fiction that I had never thought about before. Do you guys have any future implications that you're thinking about, or is it just you just only want to do Kindle Vella, or where are you guys with that?
Well, I think for me, a big part of I'm thinking diversifying is something that I think I'm really looking at this for, because right now everything that I have is in Kindle, it's all Kindle Unlimited. I'm not really outside that at all, and I really would like to get outside of that. So I'm kind of looking into Vella and Radish and all of this. Or serializing on my website, like you were saying. It's like this is sort of opening up a new avenue for me to possibly make money at it, so I can justify taking time away from the time that I'm spending writing romance for Kindle and doing something different with it that gets me a little less dependent on Kindle Unlimited and the whims of that. So it's not just Vella, it's kind of looking at serial fiction like more broadly.
I'm also I've started doing serials on Medium.
Medium. Now that's very interesting. Okay.
How does Medium work?
Yeah.
Medium is a pay per 1,000.
Yes, right. I thought it was more nonfiction. I never would have thought.
Yeah, because I have a Medium subscription, but I'm usually reading essays.
Yeah, it is more nonfiction, but there are more fiction writers trying to make it work.
I heard that like some erotica writers were trying to do something on Medium. I don't actually know how those experiments went or anything, but
they've gone very well.
Oh, have they? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there are also sci-fi and fantasy authors that are trying to get a foothold in there as well.
So is Medium paid or not? That's the part, or is it more just audience building?
It's both. You can decide that you want to be paid. And I think they'll let somebody read 3 articles for free, and after that it's behind a paywall.
Yeah, and there's a monthly subscription that's, I want to say it's like $4 or $5
it's
a
not
month.
much.
It's not much.
So it's another place to build.
So I just wrote that down because I was like, I read Medium all the time too, but mostly nonfiction. I didn't know that.
I had no idea that fiction was on there at all.
So let's see. Chris is saying my plan is to go through Patreon before I push from my direct site sales. I plan on creating an adaptation or a side story that I will act out and publish on TikTok. One of my main marketing pushes. You go, girl. Wow. You go ahead on that TikTok. Anybody else have any future implications?
Well, I'm looking at doing Vella to get back into fantasy, urban fantasy and sci-fi, because I've been writing romance lately, and I just think it's just a good way of doing it without having to have a whole lot of infrastructure, you know, because if people get in and start reading, they're in. So I think it's a good way to start to experiment with new pen names and experiment with genres that I haven't necessarily been writing in.
I like how many of us are jumping from romance into some other genre
Yes.
on there.
Well, romance makes a lot of money.
It does.
Yeah, but it's the same story over and
Mhm.
over and over again, right?
Yeah, just the idea of writing something different and having a venue to put it into where you're not having to, you know, push it to a whole new audience all on your own.
Yeah. That's always nice. Oh, look, Chris said she's having an excuse to buy more wigs. All right, so I have one more question for you guys. So at the back of the book, he had a series of resources. And, you know, because I was a former librarian, I'm always excited about more resources. I also went to his website and I almost fell in that rabbit hole. I was like, look at this and look at that and look at this, right? But I'm just wondering, did you guys look at his resources? Are you gonna, you know, dive into any more of the things that he has there, or has anyone else looked at his website? What are you guys thinking?
I purchased his other book on fiction writing just because I like his style. And then I did purchase quite a few other books that he recommended in the resources section as well.
What were the other ones that you decided to purchase? I'm curious.
One was James Scott Bell.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
That's a
that's
good
my
one.
boyfriend.
The other was,
I love him.
The other was the Truman, I think it was.
Truby. Yeah, John Truby.
John
I
Truby.
love John Truby. So I have a story about some of the resources because I've been writing for so long and I've read so many books. And so I have like a whole library of things. But when he had Lisa Cron, John Truby, and then somewhere he mentioned like Lester Dent, I was like, this man.
Yes.
And then he put like Save the Cat or something.
Yeah, Save the Cat in
oh my
here
God,
too.
I've made it home. Because I like the TV. So John Truby is definitely into the TV kind of episodes and that kind of thing, which is cool. I feel like Truby even had templates or like templates for the different types of stories that
He does on his website.
Yeah, he does. If you subscribe to his email list, he has something like that every week. Yeah.
So can I ask you guys a question real quick? Again, newbie.
Sure.
If you're in Kindle Vella, how are you harvesting the email addresses to actually reach out to your readers, or is that a possibility?
So we don't know yet. That's the thing that they've been working on trying to get. I mean, you hope that they let you go and visit my website or click this link. Yeah. So to me, I would love to put like a link to BookFunnel for them to go in, drop a freebie, and then for them to decide to sign up to my list. That's what I hope that they will do.
Yeah, it would be, thinking of like comparing to like AO3, the fan fiction site, it would make sense if they would let you at least drop a link in your author's notes at the end of each or chapter, or like, because I haven't uploaded anything to Bella, so I don't actually know what the interface looks like. I don't even know, since we don't actually know what the reader side even looks like either. You know, they browse and they click on your serial. Can they click on your name? And will they be brought to your main author site on Amazon, or is it a separate site? Do we know?
I have a friend who has actually put something on there. She's got a limit novella length thing that she broke up into episodes and put on there. And she said that at this point you have almost nothing. She said they want to try to avoid people clicking away from it, which is I get, but so apparently there's a little author notes section. You can't put links. She hasn't figured out yet if you can do HTML at all in there. So right now you don't have much.
That's so strange, because like even like on Webtoon, the interface is really just meant for you to keep reading Webtoons. But if you click like expand on the like the series synopsis or whatever, and you can click in the author's name and they'll at least let you click over. There'll be like a brief bio.
Yeah, so at
Their
least a
socials,
brief
like their
bio should be able to
Instagram.
have a link, right?
It's a little.
I'm
it's a little
hoping,
weird.
yeah, it's just so hard to say right now, but
I guess
yeah,
it's still bare
that's what she
bones,
said.
right?
So.
So
Mm-hmm.
we don't seem to know yet how they want.
Yeah, talking about that Amazon ecosystem, right?
And they want to keep you in there, yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
'cause
mean,
I was liking what you were saying, Alicia, about, creating your own ecosystem. And as a new person, I'm thinking, okay, if I jump into this, how am I going to drive traffic, to my website or what have you, if I decide to jump out? So I guess those are all things that we're all thinking about at this point.
Yeah, I know you guys, we aren't talking crafting or anything, but it reminds me of the Etsy thing where you had all those people who were doing the handmade stuff and they were Etsy strong, and then all of a sudden Etsy changed whatever, and so they start moving off, and then you have Shopify, so people are moving to Shopify so they can have control over their content, or leading people directly to their website to buy from them directly. But I still think, though, people always have an Etsy shop, right? Because that's a way to kind of drive that traffic, but then they maintain the group that they have. So I think that's what it'll probably always be like, that you got to figure out a way to drive traffic. And I don't know that Google ads or anything would drive traffic for fiction. And it's probably a lot different, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, I'm guessing they'll probably have a version of AMS ads that's just for Vella.
that makes sense.
I can see, because I'm thinking of like the Etsy shops, which you're saying. Some of the Etsy shops, they do in like their shop description, they do leave a link to like their main site that's driven by Shopify, but it doesn't have the HTML. It's just like www dot whatever.
Yes.
Just like on your author pages at Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can't, it's not instant like
clickable. So somebody'd
Right,
have to
not
copy it
clickable.
and paste it or
So,
something in there.
Yeah, so I'm wondering
hard
if
on a phone.
that's what people end up doing, at least.
Yeah, because Etsy don't want you leaving their ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think
people will
you've
start
really got
doing
the
like
right
on
idea.
They're in their author's notes.
Yes.
Usually until Amazon decides whatever they want to do.
I think you've got the right idea, Alicia, with using having your site be the hub and just kind of directing people from there, because that is something that they can't change, they can't take away from you. And yeah.
Yeah, the good news is once people become your newsletter subscribers, or they become very active, with you, they like your work, they're purchasing your work, and then you can offer them these really unique things that they can only get from you, which I think is very, very important. And there is a big difference between, at least for me, between Amazon and say BookFunnel, because on BookFunnel, even once I added up my numbers, even me adding on like a PayPal or something, I still would receive 93%. And with Amazon, you get whatever their range is, $2.99 to $9.99, you get 70%. But if you're 99 cents, then you can only get 30%. Or if you're above 99, so whatever price you put on BookFunnel, you'll be getting your 93%. And I think that's really super important, at least to me. So you can even have much smaller numbers of readership with your direct sale and make more money, than you would the other way.
And have control of that customer.
Right? Yes. And be connected with them. That's just my 2 cents. Well, that was my last question. Do you guys have any last thing that you'd like to mention or talk about with the book?
No, it's just really interesting to hear everybody else's take on it.
Yeah, it was. This has been. I've gotten a lot of food for thought here. This has been really fun.
Okay. Well,
I do
thank you
just
guys for participating.
Alicia,
Well,
I just have to
thank
say
you for putting it
I love your
together.
background. I love your background.
My Wonder Woman background.
Yes.
Well, if you guys do think in the future that you become more interested in selling direct, or you want to talk about it or something, hit me up and we can do a quick Zoom call to come up with some plans, because I think that's my direction that I want to head in. I'm really trying to figure out how I can build my ecosystem. I am excited about Kindle Vella because I think that's going to be fantastic. But I'm also just really excited about just having serial fiction be at the center of my platform and be able to utilize my strengths as a writer. Like you guys were saying, I love writing short stories. I love writing serials. I feel like this is my home. So I'm just excited to be doing all of this.
Alicia, I have a question for you. You said
ma'am.
both your sisters read this type of stuff. Are they
They do.
over 30 or under 30?
So I'm 51. And one sister is 10 years. So these are my younger sisters. One is 10 years younger than me. So she would be about 41. And then the other one is 12 years. So she's in her upper 30s.
Okay, because that's what I'm hearing a lot of people saying. The Asian market for this is a very young crowd, and that's even something he said.
Yeah.
But Amazon tends to be an older crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's going to be curious to see what happens there.
That is something I'm actually really curious about too, because my audience for my romance novels is mainly over 45. So it's going to be interesting to see if they do pull in a younger crowd, or and I think some other genres are a lot bigger with younger readers on Amazon. I think urban fantasy skews a bit younger. So I guess we'll see.
And I don't know that they really know, actually, because people maybe never decided to read on apps before, and it may never have been available to them. I mean, that is the good news about Amazon, because once they put their ecosystem in there, then a lot of people might jump on it. I never thought that I would pay for Kindle Unlimited. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to give Amazon no more of my money, even though I'm an author, right? And I have books in Kindle Unlimited. I'm like, I gotta pay for. I'm a Prime member. Why I gotta pay for that? But once Amazon creates these ecosystems or these products within their ecosystems, I mean, they've obviously, Amazon doesn't do anything that they can't make money from. I'm just saying that. So they have watched this grow and they said, "Oh, now's our time to do this." And so I think, and they had a couple of failed things. I don't think this is gonna fail because I feel like they've played enough with it to know what's happening. So probably some older readers are gonna hit Kindle Vella, and there probably never would have been that market that we thought it would be, right?
Yeah, I also can't imagine, like, if, for example, like a mystery or thriller serial goes big on Kindle Vella, I can't imagine that audience is going to be teenagers or early 20s, because I feel like that audience is like 30s and older. So I can't, like, it just will depend what hits big, because I know people are like, well, what about romance? And I was like, well, romance is big everywhere, you guys. Like, I mean,
on every platform.
yeah, on every platform and every format. So you can't say like, well, only romance will do big on Kindle Vella, because you can't. Romance is big in every format. So
I think that mystery, thriller, and suspense, people sleep on it a lot. But there's some mystery readers who are just as adamant as
dedicated readers. I remember many years ago, I heard an editor talk, and they said that they have authors, like they have readers, they only want their mysteries in like hardcover, so they do a small print run, these mysteries on hardcover for them, and then the rest is all just like mass paperback later for everyone else to run. Like, they are so loyal, especially like the cozy readers.
Yes. But also science fiction and fantasy readers, I believe the older ones will love Vella as well, because they might not have the time to read. I mean, I think that timing factor is something that no one has really discussed as well. But if you could get yourself if you love to read and you could get yourself a nice quick read in a good 15 or 20 minutes, you might enjoy that. And you might not. So these might be people who like larger works, right? But they just want something really quick, get a good hit. Velo might be for them. You know what I'm saying? So they still would want their science fiction and fantasy story, but they kind of want a little nugget. And so it might be a way to get readers to move from Vela onto your larger novels if you're writing those as well, or to larger projects. You know? So I think it's gonna be a good place to sample. Just in my opinion, but you know.
I think there's a huge amount of potential in this. It's really exciting to be a part of, honestly.
I think we're positioned really well too, because I've been in a lot of author Facebook groups and forums and that kind of thing. I see a lot of people talking about, yeah, I'm just breaking down my novel to put it in Vela, and I'm like, that's not how that works.
Don't do that.
That's not how any of this works.
And I didn't know anything about it.
And touched on that as well.
I was gonna do that, and then I took the class and go, oh, okay, it is a really different art form, and all of a sudden I think I'm a lot more excited about it now that it's it's not just the same thing, it's something new and different, and
I didn't realize initially I didn't realize how different it was, and like I said, I generally write like this, but I never intentionally wrote or did, you know what I'm saying? I just was kind of doing it. And now I was like, oh, you didn't do that enough, right? Or you didn't, like, I have a serial that's up on Amazon, and like Elena, someone asked her a question and she answered with like, you need to finish that out. And I was like, oh, right. I didn't finish that serial, right? Because I thought, oh, it's not picking up the way I want it to. So I just put a few things out there. So that is different, you know, because sometimes you might just put a book or two out to see if people like it. But with a serial, you need to go ahead and do the whole, at least a whole season, or as much of the serial arc as you can, right? You want to have more, seems to be better for that kind of thing, because then people could get sucked in and into it. It's interesting. It is a different way of writing. These are not the same methods, from what I can see. And it's not, and then people are like, oh, it's just the cliffhangers. Well, I even think it's more than cliffhangers, right?
It's more than cliffhangers.
Yeah.
I think that's what this book got me to see too, that it's just way more than just cliffhangers. There's a lot of considerations here. One of the things that I got excited about was he talked about the writing styles. I have never seen anybody do that in a writing book. He was like, okay, you got these 3 writing styles. Which one are you going to do? The young, I think one was like young adult, one was like
fiction.
The breaking down was interesting.
Yeah, general fiction or something like that. I was like, what? Yeah, I found myself reading this, talking to myself, and my husband was like, who are you talking to? I was like, what? I'm talking to R.A. Paterson.
It was funny when he broke down and compared the different writing styles. I was like, oh, this is why for a while I fell into young adult, because like I was getting tired of like the long drawn out passages. I was reading like adult fantasy.
Yeah.
So much. I was like, oh.
Yes. Well, guys, did anyone else have anything else to say?
This has been really fun.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to let me stop the recording.